We get a backstory from long ago. All the warriors of China learned martial arts for self-defense. We can see a man whose head is shaved of any hair, taking a battle-ready stance. It further explains that as time passed, this martial art evolved from a form of self-defense into a lethal art. They codified fighting forms and breathing techniques to increase internal power and combined them both to form a complex art form. We can see a man meditating on the ground with his legs crossed and his arms turned into himself. The narration goes on, saying that martial art warriors then handed down these techniques through texts, which eventually became sacred manuals. We can see a fist smashing a solid wooden block. Warriors who mastered these techniques has powers far surpassing those of ordinary human beings, and they came to be called Morim warriors. Eventually, factions formed as warriors gathered around Miram masters, hoping to become their disciples. Among the factions were the righteous faction on the left, represented by the color blue, which followed the righteous path, and all the evil faction on the right, who was represented by the color red, which followed the wicked path. However, there was a third faction that was just as formidable as the other, but pursued a completely different path, one that revered only power. A large group of men can be seen looking at their leader on an elevated platform with his guards around him. The world called them the Ghoul faction, or even the Ghoul cult. This is the story of how the illegitimate child of the demon cult who would overtake the patriarch to become the second Ghoul Lord. The Ghoul Lord is now showing his back, as his disciples look down while facing him. This is the story of Yeo and Chon. We are now back to the present. Yeo slowly opens his eyes before jolting himself awake. He sits up gasping for air. He looks at his hands in surprise, wondering how he is alive, as the last thing he can remember is being stabbed in the stomach. He rubs the sweat from his forehead and wonders what happened to himself as he is drenched in sweat from head to toe. He begins to heave and cough all of a sudden. Yeo raises his hand and is surprised to see that there's a sticky black substance on it. He looks all over his body and finds a bunch of other black sticky spots. He thins to himself that he smells so bad that he might just throw up. The nano machine asks Yeo if he is awake. He looks around, thinking he must be hearing things. But the nano machine asks the same question again. This time, Yeo jumps out of his bed in shock. He screams, asking who is speaking to him. He thinks to himself that he doesn't see anyone around. As he glances around the room, the nano machine tells him to calm down. Yeo assesses the situation. He says it sounds like a distant, whispering situation, but he has heard it once before, and it wasn't like this. He compares it to a feeling of sound vibrating directly in his head. He comes to the realization that the sound might actually be coming for his head, and the nano machine tells him he is correct. Yeo, still unable to fully grasp what is happening, shouts out, asking who the voice inside his head is. Nano Machine explains that they are Sky Corp Generation 7 Nano Machine, and that they can communicate to him by connecting directly to his brain. Yeo continues to scream. He closes his eyes and shouts that he doesn't understand a word they are saying. He once again asks the Nano Machine who they are and why they are doing this to him. Nano gives the same response, and Yeo repeats what she says. He says the words back to himself, but he gets the word machine confused with machine. Yeo remembers that the name Mashin was given to a ghoul-like spirit that is worshipped alongside the sacred flame. His eyes grow wide, and he falls to the floor on all fours. While trembling with his entire body, he asks Nano if it's true that they are the revered Mashin of the sacred flame. Nano does not give a response. We see a man and an old man talking to another. The younger man is leading the physician somewhere. As they walk to their destination, Bake, the physician, asks the younger man if it was an assassination attempt, and he confirms the old man's suspicion. He grits his teeth in frustration, explaining that a lot of people have always held the young master in contempt and have made many attempts on his life before. He admits that he never expected them to separate himself from the young master and make such a brazen attempt to take the young master's life. Physician Bake puts his hand on his chin, thinking about it all, and comes to the conclusion that if they were able to trick a master fighter such as him, Guardian, it must have been the work of the stealth squad. He adds that it was a miracle that young Master Cheon survived. Guardian tells back that he suspects someone helped the young master, but he has no idea who would go to such lengths to help him that he knows of. Bak is surprised by Jang saying he didn't know who it could be, as he explains that someone with his abilities should be able to track them down with ease. Garjang sweats a bit, thinking back to what he saw at the scene. He explains that when he arrived, the bodies of the stealth warriors were all laying cold on the floor, but the upper half of their bodies were nowhere to be found. There was only one person from the stealth squad whose bodies was intact. He was lying there, stabbed in the neck by the dagger he had given the young master. Then he heard the sound of breathing, and not too far from the stealth squad lay the young mater in a pool of blood, but he found no wounds on his body. Garjang adds that the young master's breathing was stable, as if he was just sleeping, and his clothes had been pierced by a sword, but there wasn't a single scratch on him. Baek wonders who could have helped him, and crosses the Holiness Patriarch out, since they wouldn't involve themselves in such small spats. They both agree that it is a very interesting situation as they continue walking. Yeo, still on the ground, asks Nano, who he still thinks is Mashin, if they saved him from the stealth squad. Nano says that if he is talking about fighting off the enemies, he would be incorrect. But if he is talking about the self-regeneration to save him from death, then he would be correct. Yeo asks what self-regeneration is. Nano is tired of explaining things, so they start a prompt, saying that they are transferring basic information to the user's brain. Yeo is still clueless, asking what a user is. Nano starts searching for and converting knowledge to appropriate historical terminology. Nano, in a different voice, tells Yeo that they aren't the spirit Mashin that he speaks of. Yeo takes notice of this and asks Nano again what he or she is. Nano tells Yeo that they can transfer information about themselves as well as basic instruction to his brain. Yeo asks what they are talking about. Nano ignores the question and asks Yeo if he wishes to proceed. Yeo accepts, and sparks enter his brain as a decade's worth of knowledge fill his head in a few seconds. Because of the amount of information he is receiving, he tries to hold in his vomit, but to no success. He spills all over the wooden floor of the room he is in. He starts coughing and wheezing from all the overexertion on his body and brain. Nano assures Yeo that vomiting is a common occurrence after the very first information transfer, and it won't be so hard on his body the second time they do an information transfer. Yeo sets himself up against a wall. He complains that his head is spinning is crazy. He calls Nano by their name, Nano Machine, and it responds, asking Yeo what he wants to talk about. He asks Nano if it's true that there are a huge number of little machines in his body, as he looks at his hand in curiosity. Nano responds, saying that he is correct, and mentions that there are exactly 6.8 billion nano machines in his body to be precise. Yeo is a little relieved that it wasn't a human or machine that saved after all. He asks Nano if they could leave his body if they asked him to. Nano tells him that they are stuck permanently in his body until he dies. Yeo thinks to himself that all his half-siblings are out to assassinate him, and if that wasn't enough, he now has this strange machine in his body. He wonders why this is happening to him, and asks Nano who put them in his body. But before he can finish his sentence, he hears his name being called from outside the door. It's Garjang and Baek knocking on the door, asking if he is awake. Yeo jolts up, telling Nano Machine to be quiet so he doesn't look crazy when he is talking to himself. He scrambles back into bed and Nano temporarily mutes themselves. Jang walks in thinking that the young master is asleep since he didn't open the door. Garjang sees that Yeo is awake and rushes over to him, asking if he feels all right. Before he can get close, however, he gets a sniff of Yeo and immediately recoils, putting his arm over his nose to stop the smell. He asks the young master what the smell coming from him is, and Yeo thinks to himself that he forgot he smelt so bad. Physician Baek thinks of something though and asks the young master if they have ever met before. Yeo tells Baek that he could never forget him, as he was the one who took care of his mother. The old man asks the young master to give him his hand, as he need to check his pulse. Yeo is a little hesitant, but he tells the young master to not worry. He puts his hand on the young master's wrist and flinches. He says that something strange has occurred, and Garjang turns to him in worry and screams to him if something is wrong with young master. Baek responds by saying that it's quite the opposite. Garjang is still confused and asks him what he means. The old man says that the toxins in his body have left, and his ki is circulating vigorously through his extraordinary 8 meridians. He asks Yeo if has taken some wondrous or extraordinary herb. The young master is confused and asks what he is talking about. Physician Baek tells him that his body is now in the perfect condition to learn martial arts. This is when Yeo realizes that the black sticky substance on his body was actually the poison that Nano extracted from his body. He asks Nano a question, but forgot to tell Nano to unmute, so he does that with an annoyed expression. Nano explains that all the machines in his body extracted the toxins and converted his blood vessels, tendons, and muscles to an optimal athletic state. Yo gulps, fully realizing how powerful Nano is. He chuckles a bit and asks Nano if they are sure they are not Mashin. Nano simply replies that they are confident they are a machine and not Mashin.